So, oh, am I muted? Oh, I renamed you, Alicia. I renamed you me. So that's going to be confusing. But
I just, I'll change it.
yeah, my name is Jesse Terry, and I'm with Yellowstone-Teton Clean Cities. I'm in Bozeman, Montana. We cover Montana, Wyoming, and parts of Idaho. And this is a monthly call we do for renewable diesel. We've been doing it for about a year and a half. Um, the interest keeps coming, so we keep doing it. And I'm sort of running out of topics to cover. So in that poll, I offered to everybody if you can uh, fill in something you might be interested in learning, maybe after this or right now. It'll help me tailor the next chat. This one, I'm going to focus on just general information and things we've gone over in more detail in other talks. And then I'm going to sprinkle in a few recent news articles about renewable diesel because things have changed a little bit this year. On the call, I can already see we have some fuel distributors. We probably have some of the fuel producers. We have people who use it, people who are planning to use it. We have other clean cities people on the call. So there is a diverse set of people here that if you have any questions at the end, somebody will probably have the answer. So again, we are Clean Cities Coalition. We're a program of the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office. I've been saying for the last year that there are 75 clean cities, but I think we're up to about 80 now. We have Alaska and a few others. We cover most of the country. Most clean cities cover a city or sometimes a state. We cover a region. We started off just as the gateway entrances to Yellowstone National Park, but we've since expanded quite a bit and just try to help anybody we can. On that note, we are in the process of hopefully becoming an apprentice coalition so we can have Montana clean cities specifically. It will give us more resources and more ability to help Montana specifically. And so I've done some stakeholder outreach these last 6 months in Helena, Great Falls, Missoula, Billings, and Butte specifically. And so if any of you have any desire to help or questions, feel free to email me. My email is at the bottom there. And you're going to go through this. It's a bit of a process, but if it works out, that would be awesome. So yeah, like I said, we've been doing this for about a year and a half, probably almost 2 years if we start at the very beginning. But I've tried to post a lot of these recordings on our website. And we've also submitted a grant proposal with Treasure Valley Clean Cities Coalition in Boise. And that is aimed at sort of similar to this, but specifically for fuel distributors. So we are hoping to educate and inform fuel distributors so they're equipped with the right tools and knowledge to tell customers. Because we hear from certain customers that certain fuel distributors said we can't get that fuel, it doesn't work, or whatever they say. But we're going to try and help if we're awarded this funding, and we'll do it otherwise, or regardless, we'll probably do some of this outreach. But it'll something we're hoping we can do in the future. All right, so I have most of this presentation start off with this slide that what is renewable diesel? Well, firstly, it's not biodiesel. I think people this is not being a confusing point anymore, but it's something that does come up every time. It is a biofuel, but it's not biodiesel. It's very different. It's chemically similar to petroleum diesel, just much cleaner. It can be blended with petroleum diesel in any amount. It requires no changes to fueling systems, handling, or your engine. It meets all the ASTM standards as petroleum diesel. So I'm going to go through production, public availability, some of the properties of renewable diesel, the chemical composition, specifically look at some soot, and then some carbon emissions for entities and fleets that are concerned with their carbon footprint. That's something that's driving some of the adoption of renewable diesel lately. And then we'll open up to discussion. If there's a specific question that you think I may not be able to answer in that slide, feel free to chime in and I'll address it on the site. So production in our region specifically, we have a refinery in Great Falls, Montana Renewables. There is one in Marathon, or Marathon owns one in Dickinson, North Dakota. There are two in Wyoming. So we have a significant production capacity in our region. So in January, or January 2021, there were 6 renewable diesel plants. Then in 2022, there were 11. And then in 2020, oh, that should say 2023 on the top right, there were 17. And then more recently, this is something I just found out today, that there are actually 22. And then you can see on the left, this is the kind of summary of the production over the course of the last 5 years, with some projected productions. And I've highlighted the 4 refineries in our region, and ours and one of them in Wyoming do anticipate increasing their production slightly, whereas, or sorry, ours and none of the others in Wyoming are under increased production, but there's one other one in Louisiana that's going to increase its production. So the production is staying pretty flat for renewable diesel moving forward. But I just learned this today too, that there are a dozen more planned renewable diesel refineries coming online. They anticipate in 2027 or later. So the production capacity should increase, but that remains to be seen, because as things politically are changing, I think this may change, and it might go one way or the other. I don't know. So here's a sprinkled in. Oh, I guess I have the order out, but there's it'll probably pop up randomly in this presentation now, but there's been talk of how production and demand has maybe peaked recently, which then will in turn probably slow the build out of new facilities. So while this is a projection, recent news articles suggest that maybe we kind of have plateaued for a little bit. And that's coupled with the low carbon fuel standards that are also, the mandate for renewable fuels has gone down, so the demand therefore also goes down. So the public availabilities, you can get this fuel anywhere. It might just cost you a lot to get it shipped to you. As you saw, all the refineries are throughout the country. But if you want to get renewable diesel as a regular person for your regular truck or car, you can, but the availability is limited. So part of this work originally was focused on trying to make it available for just the regular consumers in our region, and it worked. So originally there were 500 or 600 stations in California where you could get renewable diesel, some in Oregon and some in Washington, and that was it for the whole country. This is a couple of years ago. Then shortly thereafter, we worked with Parkland Fuels, and they offered it at a station in Belgrade, Montana. Soon after, a Shell station in Jackson, Wyoming had it and still does. And then Nampa, Idaho, Conrad Bischoff, which is all owned by Parkland, made it available. So these 3 stations are all parent company is Parkland Fuels, and that's kind of why it was happened all sort of at the same time. Earlier or late last year, 2 new retail stations opened up that I'm aware of, one in New York and one in New Jersey. There may be a couple others, but not on the Alternative Fuel Data Center. The website's there on the bottom. You can source all fueling stations for all different alternative fuels, including renewable diesel. But as far as I know, these are the only places you can buy it at retail. Yeah, so this is the news article they meant to have right after the increase in production capacity. So a lot of it, along with everything, is there's uncertainty in the market, and so they anticipate a lot of things slowing down. And they haven't made projections for the required volumes of biofuels yet. So everyone's just kind of at a standstill. And this, I think, has been reflected in the price in the last couple of months. Some of the ski resorts have told me that the pricing has gone up a little bit than what they expected. And maybe it's partly due to refineries not cranking it out. They're just kind of putting along until they can figure out what's going to happen next. And this is another article where they said the diesel boom had leveled out. So production has doubled in the last 2 years, so it's gone up quite a bit. And so, yeah, they're thinking we've kind of maybe hit a plateau for now. Try and mute that beeping if I can. So some of the property comparisons of petroleum diesel with renewable diesel, and I've always left biodiesel in here just for some context of the old biofuels. So one of the big numbers where renewable diesel excels is cetane. So ASTM standards dictate a minimum cetane. I think it's 42, but maybe it's 40 according to this. That's the minimum cetane, and typically that's where it is for petroleum diesel. There are cetane boosters that you can buy, and people add that to their fuel. But renewable diesel starts off 75 to 90 cetane. So you could never even get petroleum diesel as high as renewable diesel is, just from the production of it. And so cetane is sort of comparable to octane. It's a bit different, but it represents the completion and efficiency of the combustion of the fuel. So a higher cetane is a desirable trait. Um, then the oxidative stability of renewable diesel exceeds petroleum and biodiesel, so it lasts really long in tanks. It doesn't absorb water as much. There's less microbial growth. It has a really good shelf life, the renewable diesel. Lubricity is the one place where biodiesel beats the other two fuels. It's very, very lubricating. Renewable diesel should have the exact same lubricity as petroleum diesel. That's an ASTM minimum, and so they both those fuels will meet that. So chemically, you can look at the two fuels side by side. I think it explains a lot and helps people better understand how petroleum differs from renewable diesel. So what I show here are a bunch of molecules to represent what's in petroleum diesel. It's a complex mixture of these hydrocarbons. There's the aromatic or the cyclic hydrocarbons, the rings that you see there. There's a bunch of linear hydrocarbon chains, those lines. You'll see the different colored atoms in there. There's some sulfur, and there are metals in these impurities in the petroleum diesel. About 25% of petroleum diesel is comprised of these aromatic hydrocarbons and metal containing molecules. And then 75% are these paraffins, or these linear chained hydrocarbons. So then renewable diesel is essentially just a very small subset of these linear hydrocarbons that I've highlighted here. So it's a very narrow range. It's like C15, so that's the number of carbons in it, to C18, so very narrow. There aren't any metals, there aren't any of these impurities. So that's pretty much why it is such a better fuel. It doesn't have all this extra gunk in there. It's a very pure form of diesel, you could think of it. So when you burn them in a kerosene lantern or just in a little crucible like this, you can see petroleum diesel has all this soot, and that's mainly because of all these extra molecules in there. So you have these different molecules, you burn them, you're going to make way more molecules. It's just a really complex, dirty mixture. When you burn renewable diesel, there's essentially, well, visibly, there's nothing coming off of it. It's very, very clean. And it should be noted the energy content is exactly the same. Everything's exactly the same in the fuel, other than some of these dirty chemicals that are in there. Quickly, I'll just touch on ASTM requirements. So D975 is the diesel ASTM standard, which in itself contains 3 or maybe 5 other ASTM tests that fuel has to meet to be considered diesel. And owner's manuals will show, this is an example of an owner's manual, and it'll say that you have to use fuel that meets this ASTM standard. So renewable diesel does meet this ASTM standard. So from a warranty perspective, it is diesel, and from a chemical perspective, it's also diesel. So there's no worry that it's going to void your warranty, because this is diesel. It's the same. Biodiesel, on the other hand, has a different set of ASTM standards, and it is not diesel. It doesn't meet these same standards. So it's a different fuel. So I was going to talk a little bit about carbon emissions. This was an initial slide I made a year and a half ago. It's pretty busy, but what I was trying to get at here was, on the left, you have a fleet of 10 vehicles, and they're emitting 100 carbon units, just a random unit. Now, if you take one of those 10 diesel vehicles and replace them with an electric vehicle, you're going to reduce your emissions by 10%. Of course, this is just a generalization, because EVs also have emissions, but just for the sake of argument, in this representation, replacing one of these diesel vehicles with an electric vehicle, you can reduce your carbon emissions by 10%. And there's a cost associated with that, because the vehicle costs money. And so what I've calculated here was, to get a 10% reduction in your carbon emissions, that's going to cost you about $12,000, or $1,200 per percent of reduction. Now, if you just don't change any of that fleet, they remain all diesel, you put renewable diesel in all of those vehicles, At the time of this presentation, renewable diesel was $5 a gallon. It has come down since then. But at the time of this presentation, so you can, by putting 100% renewable diesel in all of these diesel vehicles, you'll reduce your carbon emissions by 75%. So it's much more effective than replacing one of them with electric car or electric truck. And the cost to do this is only $267 per percent when renewable diesel was $5 a gallon, which it is lower than that now. So the carbon reduction per dollar is much more effective using renewable diesel in existing diesel vehicles as opposed to replacing some of them with an electric vehicle. That's not to say you shouldn't consider the electric vehicle, but just to put it in perspective of EVs is another way to look at it. So this is just an emissions benefit that I'm talking about here. So as that you saw that picture of the soot coming off of the burned petroleum diesel, and on the other side where there was the renewable diesel, there was no soot coming off. What the emission systems do in new vehicles is they reduce your tailpipe emissions quite a bit, at least with the particulate matter, and they do that through their diesel particulate filters. So anybody who has a fleet or has a diesel vehicle, a newer one, is aware of diesel particulate filters because that is one of the things that causes most of the issues for fleets. They have these diesel particulate filters trap these small particles, and then eventually they have to be regenerated, and they burn these particles off. Ideally, they happen while you're driving, but sometimes you have to do a forced regen, and that takes time, takes fuel. And then worst case scenario is you have to replace that whole diesel particulate filter or send it away to have it regened separately. That can cost quite a bit. I've heard many people say it's about $5,000 to swap out a DPF on a big truck. Some fleets will have backups, and they'll just do it every year just to avoid any downtime. So what happens in these diesel particulate filters? They're a honeycomb material, ceramic material, and they physically clog, and they bind the soot and they clog it, and that's why it has to be regenerated. So I guess I didn't say that explicitly, but renewable diesel doesn't have that soot, so the clogging is much, much less. And so you don't have to regenerate your diesel particulate filters very often, if at all. And so this was looked at with Idaho National Lab because they have the DOE's largest vehicle fleet. They have, at the time, 2 years ago, they had 90 motor coaches that drive out to their desert site every day. And so they were using renewable diesel in the summertime, and they were able to compare the maintenance regimen for renewable diesel and petroleum diesel. And then so I've extrapolated something else that we've learned from Vancouver, Washington's fire department fleet. They switched to renewable diesel a couple years ago, and this is a handout we have on the right, and it identifies some of the key factors that he mentioned, and that was that the passive diesel particulate filter regenerations happen much less frequently, the much lower soot. Their fuel filters are lasting much, much longer, from a month and a half to over a year. But all in all, what we were told was they're saving about 5 hours of maintenance per month per vehicle. So that's both fuel filters, DPF regens, all kinds of things. So we use that data and extrapolated it to the 90 motor coaches at Idaho National Lab to give them an idea of how much money they're probably saving by using renewable diesel. And so one of the big factors is just that reduction in monthly maintenance. And at a lot of assumptions are made here at $135 hourly mechanic rate and a few other things, but it's about $8,000 per year per vehicle for Idaho National Lab. So them burning renewable diesel throughout the summer, and they weren't doing it in the winter. The average was about, I think it was R45, 45% average if you look over the course of a year. And then you can see the maintenance savings I've highlighted per bus was about $4,000. So per fleet of these 90 motor coaches is about $360,000. And if they go up every 5%, they go up, you can see a decrease in maintenance costs or an increase in savings. So it's just a projection thing to show burning a little bit more would probably save them some more money. Just another way to look at it. So their averages are 45, and it probably reduced their maintenance costs by $367,000. Again, this was when renewable diesel was about $5 a gallon. And then I think the ultimate goal of this little analysis was to show how much more would be saved by bumping up their use. So bumping it up 5% could save them another 80,000 in maintenance costs. So again, at this time when it was $5 a gallon, every dollar in addition spent to every dollar that they spent on renewable diesel, in addition to what they would have spent on petroleum diesel, saved them about $2 in maintenance costs. Then when the fuel went down in price, spending an extra dollar on renewable diesel saved them about $4 in maintenance costs. So it really fluctuates with the market and the cost of both renewable and petroleum diesel. So back to emissions from a carbon standpoint, not really a soot standpoint, but from an emissions for carbon emissions standpoint, here are a couple of different illustrations to show where these reductions actually occur. So on the left is from the California Air Resources Board. I've highlighted two of the more salient reductions. So of course, drilling for crude oil takes a lot of energy. Vegetable oil, used cooking oil as an example, you're not drilling for it, you're just collecting it, but there is a cost associated with collecting it. Refining is not that much different. Everything in between is not that much different. But then the overall emissions when you're burning the fuel are essentially zero for renewable diesel and much higher for petroleum diesel. This is a little bit misleading because the tailpipe emissions aren't that different. The tailpipe emissions are reduced with renewable diesel, but not as significantly as it shows here. The reason that number is so much lower is because they're assuming the carbon that is being expelled from the emissions was captured by the plant for the feedstock. So it's a life cycle emissions reduction. Neste, which was one of the pioneers of renewable diesel, this is their carbon emission reduction. They say it's about 90% less. So it all really depends on where the feedstocks are sourced, where the refining takes place, where the fuel is consumed. If it's all in a close proximity, that number is going to be increased. Also worth noting, sometimes they used to use palm oil for the feedstock, which is horrible for rainforests and deforestation. In Europe, I think they can't even use palm as a feedstock. So those would be weighed in when people are doing emissions calculations. In addition to the carbon emissions, there are lower levels of fine particulate matters, carbon monoxide, nitrous oxides. All these other toxic emissions are reduced with renewable diesel. This is a handout we made. It kind of illustrates what I've already shown, but it's just my hypothetical fleet of 10 vehicles and the reduction in emissions depending on what percentage of renewable diesel this fleet were to use. So with petroleum diesel, the emissions are about 2.8 million pounds of carbon dioxide. Now, if you used 50% renewable diesel, your emissions would be about 1.7 million pounds of CO2. And if you use R99, which is essentially 100% renewable diesel, your emissions would be about 700,000 pounds. Now, if you go back to my comparison with electric vehicles, you can see the R50, that reduction is kind of equivalent to replacing 4 of those 10 buses with electric. And if you were to use R99, that would be similar in emissions to replacing 8 of your 10 buses with electric. So with the push for electric, we were just on an electric call just right before this one, an electric Drive Electric Montana call. And I mean, some people are adopting EVs that were totally opposed to them in the past, and it's kind of up in the air. But regardless, renewable diesel can achieve some of the goals that some people have by replacing electric vehicles or replacing diesel vehicles with electric vehicles. That's kind of dated. And then this is again the Idaho National Lab data, but putting it in terms of electric buses because they did purchase two electric motor coaches. We got to ride in them, and they have their setbacks and their benefits, but they're very expensive. Everyone agrees on that. And so by using R45, it was kind of similar to having 30 electric motor coaches. Feel like I keep repeating this, but this is just another way to look at it. If you had 100 buses and you just ran 1.5% renewable diesel in all of those 100 buses, it'd be the equivalent of replacing one of them with an electric bus. And 1.5% renewable diesel would like the cost would be negligible. It'd be negligible. So there's a bunch, not a bunch, but there is some pushback on renewable diesel. It's not a godsend. It's not going to solve all the issues. It's sort of an intermediate step as we try to reduce emissions in other ways. University of Massachusetts was using it in a boiler to heat the campus, and some of the climatologists, climate scientists at the school said this is not great because it doesn't solve the problem. It kind of just postpones what needs to be done. But again, there are emissions when you produce renewable diesel. There are emissions when you burn it. It's just a lot lower than petroleum diesel. So it's not the answer, but it's a much better option than diesel with very minimal changes required. And more regionally, Montana Renewables, which is up in Great Falls, has been getting pushback, and there's been some concerns with their wastewater disposal of their wastewater. So pre-treat all these oils and fats that they're using, they produce wastewater. While they say it's not toxic, and I'm pretty sure it isn't toxic, it's a dirty water, and they're pumping it. They proposed pumping it underground as a way to dispose of it. And so there's a lot of pushback there. It seems like maybe this is on hold. This is only from a few weeks ago, this most recent article. Most refineries that I'm aware of use a on-site wastewater treatment plant like you would with any wastewater, and then they just release it back like you do with wastewater for municipalities do. But they had proposed just pumping it underground, and so a lot of pushback there. So again, it's not perfect. I don't think this is the fault of renewable diesel. This is just the end goal of the cost to dispose of a product they want to get rid of. And then this was actually sent to me this morning by two different people, even though it came out earlier this month. A big renewable diesel plant is proposed in Oregon, and it's near the river, the Columbia River, and there's concerns with its impact. And again, I don't think this is renewable diesel specific. This is the result of any mass industrial process happening next to a river is not good. But these are concerns. And as I mentioned, refining renewable diesel does produce emissions, and it does pollute, and it's not perfect. It's just a lot better than petroleum diesel production. All right, well, that's the end of what I had. I'm happy to answer any questions, open it up to discussion, whatever you guys want. And then if there's, if anybody has any feedback on anything I mentioned, more insight than I do, feel free to speak up.
Jesse, you did have a question in the chat.
All right, let's open that up. The distributors in New York and New Jersey, they should be on the AFDC. You might not be filtering properly. I think if you do renewable diesel, they both should show up. I've spoken to the one in New Jersey a few times to get the current price. It's just a regular gas station that has it. But I can definitely get back to you if you can't find it, or just email me if you can't get that information.
Gotcha. I thought you specifically said that it was not on the data center, so that's why I was curious.
Oh, yeah, it is. There may be some that are not on the AFDC, but those two are.
Okay, cool. Thanks so much.
Yep. So the recordings of these meetings, and I don't have the one from last month up, so I'll have to get that to you, but they're on our website. I'm trying to migrate them from Zoom to YouTube because we have limited storage in Zoom. So they may be down for a while. And if there's one you want to see and you click the link and it doesn't work, just let me know and I can send it right to you. So a lot of the stuff I mentioned today, there are 1 hour long calls where we go into specifics on that exact topic. Like there were a couple specifically for ski resorts, and then there was one that was focused on winter performance of renewable diesel. There was one looking at how cetane additives compare to renewable diesel. So there are a lot of these that go into a lot of detail, but I'm happy to explain more if anybody has anything.
Hey, Jesse, this is Eric.
Hey,
So one thing I've run into with a couple people or a couple entities in the county is they're worried about voiding the warranty. And I know you mentioned earlier it will not void the warranty. And it's not just them being worried they'd void the warranty, it's the dealer. So I don't know if there's any way to get that information, how I could get that information to the dealer to put that away so that they could start it's our recycling center is starting to utilize it in their older hook truck, but the newer one, they're scared of voiding the warranty because of the dealers telling them that.
yeah, that would I guess you just have to look at the warranty, and it would likely say you have to burn ASTM D975 compliant fuel. That's probably what it says. And renewable diesel is that fuel. So I don't know, maybe they're conflating it with biodiesel.
Yeah,
But-
I tried to explain that, but I thank you for the ASTM. Let me write it down.
D975, I think, is the diesel standard set of standards tests they do.
Okay, great.
I'd
Thank
be
you.
happy to talk to them. I'd like to know. It's not true, but I'd like to hear why they think that.
I think it's just a general unfamiliarity, and I think I need that if what you just gave me to hopefully get them past it.
Yeah.
Invite him in on this conversation, Eric.
Well, I have, and our and the folks from ISWR have been on this call before, but it's that next level person that's they don't know enough to fight against. So
Which manufacturer vehicle is this? Do you know?
Yeah, let me give you just a second. I'll let you know.
Because if it's like Cummins has explicitly said numerous times on their website that HVO or renewable diesel doesn't void warranty. They've said that numerous times. I don't know about every manufacturer, but I mean, if you look at Piston Bully or Prenoth, the two main snow groomer manufacturers that supply the United States, on both of those websites, the front page shows that they work great with those fuels, and at least one, if not both, use Cummins diesel engines.
It's a Peterbilt 536.
Do you know what block is in it by chance? I tell you what, I threw my email in the chat there.
Sure.
If you want to send me the information on the truck itself, specifically if it's a Pack car, a Cummins, maybe even a Cat. I doubt it's a Cat in that, but it'd be sweet if it was. And then just I'll kick you back just a product data sheet on renewable.
Great, that would be awesome. I will do that ASAP. So it's great.
All right.
So
Sweet,
can
thank
you CC me on that too?
Yes, I will.
Absolutely. Let
Thanks.
me dig up what I can on it, and then I'll put it out, and that way you can have it in yours, because it's almost so much of a common thought that it is that nobody's really produced any sort of document saying this is the same thing as diesel, doesn't void warranties. It's such an assumption in the industry that it's the same thing, only better. So it might take me a little bit of time to track down, but I'm sure we can come up with something. If not, as Parkland as a distributor, we should be able to get something from the refinery that states that.
Okay.
And I've got a good contact with Peterbilt and Kenworth. I can ask him as well. So if you get it to a dead end, let me know.
Okay, great.
So in the comments, it said I mentioned the refining process for renewable diesel is less polluting than diesel. That's not really what I meant to say. If I did say that, it's very similar. Refining petroleum diesel or refining renewable diesel is almost the same process. So the emissions would probably be very similar in both cases. The big difference is the feedstocks, but I think that the refining itself doesn't have much of a difference in emissions during the refining process. So,
Can I step to that
yep.
real quick? It kind of depends on what we learned from the Nesty guys. Is it kind of depends on the location of the refinery. They're one in the Netherlands. They pull the water for the refining process out of the Baltic Sea, and when they're done, it goes back in. But like you're saying, Jesse, so much of that has to do with the base stocks and the feedstocks. So if you don't have all that crud in there to begin with, there's all that less crud when you're done. With petroleum diesel, when you're done, they make asphalt out of it, and that's your roads. With renewable diesel, it's so clean to begin with. There's not a lot of that left over. That's where there's a lot less, not so much emissions in the refining process, but in the bio waste.
Yeah, and the feedstock cleaning of the feedstocks, essentially the vegetable oils, animal fats, that can happen at facilities that do that, and they can bring by rail. They can bring nice clean vegetable oil, and there'd be none of that at the site of the refining. But if they do the cleaning of the feedstocks on site, then that's an additional effluent that they would have to dispose of. So Bo, that's been talking here, is with Conrad and Bischoff, owned by Parkland, and they've been, I think, one of the better partners in our region for making renewable diesel available to fleets. They supply Jackson Hole Mountain Resort. They supply Big Sky Ski Resort here in Montana. And so as far as I know, they have the most experience in distributing the fuel, but that's not to say they're the only ones that can do it. I think almost any fuel distributor could supply it. They just have to source it and be willing to do it. But it's not uniquely something that only one fuel distributor can offer.
Yeah, don't think we wish it wasn't.
Yeah. Well, effectively it is. Okay. And so I guess I'll mention one more thing that has kind of throw things into disarray this year was what was called the blender's credit. I don't know how long it was in existence, but that allowed anybody, any fuel distributor or anybody, to blend renewable diesel in with an existing fuel. And that you get $1, they would get $1 per gallon. So that's why historically you would always see R99, because they blend 1% petroleum into that fuel and then they get $1 for their blender's credit. That went away at the end of 2024, and then 2025. And as far as I understand, it is implemented, but that was kind of up in the air too. It's a different credit. It's a producer's credit. So you have to produce the fuel to get that $1 credit. And it's not always $1. It's rarely $1, actually. It depends on the feedstock. So the cleaner the feedstock, the higher that credit. The dirtier the feedstock, the lower that credit. So that's going to change the markets as well. And that's still up in the air, and has something to do with the pricing fluctuations, from what I've been told.
Jesse, hey, it's Eric again. I have one thing to add, actually. So we did a very low tech cold point temperature test with our fire EMS department. They basically just took a small amount of renewable diesel and left it outside when we had a -20 cold snap for 4 days and no issues. So
yeah, that's cool. Did they share any pictures with you?
they didn't give me any pictures. He just gave me the report out, because before he wanted to put it in the tank, this is the fire EMS mechanic. He wanted to do his own test, and so he did that and was happy and started putting it into the fleet vehicle.
So do you know if that was 100% or 50%, or do you know that?
That was I think R10, because it was whatever was coming out of the Shell station right now. That's what we're utilizing.
And I'm not surprised. That'd be fine. But
but it's just good for people that aren't in these meetings to hear that. So
yeah, that's what one of the fleet managers in Vancouver, Washington did. Was he would have, when he got the delivery of fuel, he bought an ultra low freezer, a -40 freezer, and he put the fuel in there so he could assure himself that it would be good to -40. Despite what the results and the fuel suppliers told him, he wanted to see firsthand. And he said it gave him a lot of comfort, and he was able to sleep at night not worrying about that kind of thing. So I think it is very helpful to see it firsthand. Well, I'll stay on for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions, but I'm hoping if anybody here has something specific they want to hear, I'm running out of ideas after 15 of these. I don't know what else to talk about without repeating myself. So anybody has any suggestions, I'm all ears. I'm thinking next time I might focus one specifically on sustainable aviation fuel. While it's not renewable diesel, it's the same process, it's the same kind of product. So I might do that because there's some stuff I don't know about that I'd like to learn. But I'm open to any suggestions. So let me know.
Jesse, this is Andrew Mentor from Blaine County. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Hey, sorry, I just hopping between meetings here, but I was wondering if y'all might have touched base about kind of the coalition building and regional market building efforts and best practices. We've got a few things going right now that we're pretty excited about. I know Bo and Guy are on the call as well, but wondering if you guys touched on that, and I would hate to rehash it if you just talked about it, but if not, if that's of interest for the dialogue.
Sure. Andrew, we're on the emails, right? So who are you with again exactly?
I'm with Blaine County in Idaho.
So the coalition building I mentioned, while it would work on it's Montana specific, but our existing coalition, along with Jason Green, we do want to build our coalition. So it's just a sort of similar terminology, but different projects. And yeah, with Treasure Valley and ourselves and a few people and fleets around Sun Valley, Idaho, they're all wanting to use renewable diesel. So we're trying to find a way to get together as a group and I don't know, promote it or show that there is a desire to do that, and we want to help. Yeah, I don't know how to answer the question. It's probably more of a discussion. See who's on the call. I mean, when Amy at Big Sky worked to implement renewable diesel, it was sort of them. I think they worked a little bit with Jackson Hole Mountain Resort to get some affirmation that it would work, but it was ultimately them trying with trial and error, and they decided they did want to continue. So that's how they proceeded. Who else is Steve's here? Steve Park from Jackson Hole Mountain Resort. He's been using biodiesel, then renewable diesel, and he just, I think, essentially made the decision that he trusted it and has been leading it for years now. Yeah, maybe we can meet after, unless anybody has any feedback, or if you have a more specific question, Andrew, that maybe other people can help us answer.
Yeah, I mean, kind of at a high level, I guess. I don't know if this is a more precise question, but we've got like 20-ish off takers or potential off takers who are extremely interested in adopting renewable diesel. There's some seasonality and product type discussions that we're hashing out kind of on the technical assessment side of things, but the short version is we have a lot of people who are pretty excited about it, and these are all the major off takers in Blaine County, Sun Valley area, and so we're going to try and pair that with our greenhouse gas emissions inventory and do some environmental calculation as well as some economic calculation to sort of move this forward. But I think our next step is going to be to do a survey so we can quantify the kind of volume, peak winter, peak summer, off peak, all those kind of things. And then work with the supplier to figure out, kind of how people do that through coalition. We have some procurement and legal issues we have to kind of navigate being a local government, but our goal is to just sort of stay the course. And I think we have at least 5 or 6 entities that are ready to go right now, and we'll probably have 5 or 6 more in the next couple of weeks. And we're just going to kind of give it a collective shot. So I don't know that we need to get too cute with our approach or our glide path, but I'm curious if other communities or entities are seeing kind of that coalition approach, or if people are just trying it and seeing how it goes.
I think the coalition approach helped us. I mean, when I'm with Big Sky Resort, when we first met with Jesse, he helped connect us, Bridger Bowl, another ski area, and I think it was Bend, Oregon, and at the time Prenoth, a few different companies who had experience with it, and just having that conversation with people convinced us of a little movement forward versus just trying it out. But ultimately we did just have to kind of risk it and go for it and figure it out ourselves. But I think having that conversation definitely primed us to ask questions and feel more comfortable with it.
Thanks for that. Did you perceive that there was, in fact, any real risk, or was it really just kind of a trial and error? You know, your market interface is a little bit different for, say, a 6-month beta, or was there actual risk in this, or was it really just making a pivot for a minute, and if it didn't work, you were perfectly able to go back to what you were doing before?
Yeah, I don't think it was a real risk because we did it. We went in all in R99 in the summer. And then we just monitored and it's super easy to blend it down. So like we were ready to be responsive and knowing what we had to do. If there's a problem, we did that. And so we did have a little bit of gelling with the first product that we were getting from our supplier. But we addressed it and then just lowered the levels that we were using in the winter. So my team has been pretty comfortable with it the entire time. I don't think it's been like a huge risk for us. But that being said, we didn't take it lightly. We definitely were like, okay, let's scale it down, scale it up as we need, and monitor it.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, there's two things I can add to that. One is to avoid any issues. If you just start at like R10, I can try and help get some data for that, but that'll have 0 issues. And the issues maybe Amy might be alluding to were cold weather operability issues. And the reason for that is all renewable diesel currently is produced and spec'd for California because that's where almost all of it goes. So it's essentially, it's like a summer #2 diesel, which doesn't perform great in the winter in our region. So that's the only concern really is that cold weather operability, and that's why you have to blend it. And so having that in mind, using a 10% blend, and I can show you all that information too. You are so safe even in the winter, but in the summer there should be 0 issues with any cold weather unless it drops to -20 unexpectedly. But that's the only real thing to consider, and you can mitigate it by just blending it down ahead of time. And then the other thing I would mention is that people might be hesitant, and so in Big Sky's case, they have their own tanks, so whatever fuel they get, that's what they're going to have to use. Some fleets, some cities near where we are, fuel at a regular gas station, at a retail location. And so if you have a bunch of fleets fueling at one of the tanks that you control, you can put a small percentage in it, and people don't either going to use it or they have to use it because that's where they get it. So inevitably they'll have 6 months of experience using it whether they wanted to or not. Then maybe they're comfortable with it. But you can essentially force their hand in using it if they're fueling from a tank. And that also happens at Big Sky. So any construction that's going on at Big Sky, they fuel from Big Sky's tanks. And so they have to use whatever fuel's in that tank. So they are inevitably going to use renewable diesel whether they want to or not.
Yeah, and I think the communication thing was something we had to address like beforehand, making sure like our whole team and all of our operations were on board and understood what was going to happen. And then just really good communication with our supplier. So when something was a hiccup, and it was winter, that we were coming out of summer heading into winter, so it was like the first time the temperature dropped and we were still using R99, so we hadn't made the switch yet. And then just good communication with our supplier allowed us to just pivot and adjust, but we would have had to do that with any fuel that was in our tank at that point. So again, we addressed it pretty quickly, but our whole team was on board and ready to do what we had to do.
Yes, summer is probably the safest time to do this because you don't have any of those issues. Steve Parker probably would talk to you in detail about how he predicts what the weather doesn't predict, but he sees the forecast and adjusts the tank's percentage throughout the winter so that you can maximize the benefits of renewable diesel without the risk of gelling. So it's not a new fuel and it's not a different fuel, but it's not what everyone's used to. So it takes a little bit more awareness and people, it's not just a drop in. It is a drop in fuel, but not in everybody's eyes. They think it's a different fuel. So just having people aware that it takes a little more awareness of the ordering process just to make sure that you're on top of it. Then one other thing to mention for winter operability is that additives, cold weather additives, don't work in renewable diesel. So that's not a backup plan, and everyone just needs to be aware. It's not, you don't just, oh, it's getting cold, let's put a winter additive. They don't work in renewable diesel yet. All right, well, I don't see any more questions, so I'll officially end the call, but I'm happy to stay on for another 15 minutes if anybody wants to chat or ask any other questions. So I'm going to stop, and thanks everybody for attending, and hopefully we have something new and interesting next month. All right.
Thanks, Jesse.
Yep.